Nobody saw this coming, not like this. Because what's being claimed about Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole isn't just another wave of hip-hop rumors. It feels more personal, more direct, and far more intense than what fans expected. And somehow, it all circles back to one name that continues to dominate and divide the entire conversation: Drake. Now listen carefully, because this isn't being framed as a public beef or a staged moment for attention. According to circulating claims online, this is about a private interaction, something never meant to be seen, heard, or discussed publicly. A behind-the-scenes moment that allegedly leaked. And in that moment, things reportedly got uncomfortable fast. Sources suggest Kendrick Lamar didn't just disagree with J. Cole, he confronted him directly. No cameras, no audience, no performance, just raw, unfiltered energy between two of the most respected voices in modern hip-hop. And the reason wasn't random. It was about alignment. J. Cole, long seen as the neutral figure in hip-hop, the artist who avoids direct conflict, stays balanced, and rarely engages in public disputes, was allegedly perceived as shifting his stance in subtle ways. Not aggressively, not openly, but enough for people to notice. Enough for Kendrick to question it. And according to these claims, Kendrick didn't ignore it. He addressed it. To understand why this moment has people talking, you have to go back to the foundation of it all. Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, and Drake, the so-called Big Three of modern hip-hop. For years, these three weren't seen as enemies. They were the top tier of a generation, each one dominant in their own lane, each one respected for different strengths. Kendrick Lamar was the lyricist, introspective, sharp, deeply analytical in his storytelling. J. Cole was the balance, thoughtful, grounded, often positioned as the mediator in an industry known for conflict. Drake was the commercial powerhouse, ubiquitous, strategic, and constantly dominating mainstream culture. For a long time, there was respect between them, not necessarily friendship, but a shared understanding. They collaborated, referenced each other, and coexisted without direct hostility. But over time, that balance began to shift. Fans started noticing subtle changes first. A lyric here, a verse there, a different tone in interviews, slight differences in how each artist positioned themselves when speaking about the industry. Nothing direct, but enough to spark speculation. Then Kendrick Lamar released material that many listeners interpreted as pointed commentary toward industry power structures, and possibly toward Drake's position within them. Nothing was explicitly named, but hip-hop fans read between the lines immediately. Interpretations spread fast. Discussions exploded. Suddenly, the Big Three didn't feel balanced anymore. It felt like tension was forming underneath the surface. That's where J. Cole became the focus. For years, his role was simple: stay neutral. The peacemaker, the voice of balance, the one who could exist in the same conversation without fueling conflict. But recently, that perception started to shift. Some fans began pointing out moments where Cole's messaging seemed slightly more aligned in one direction. Not openly aggressive, not confrontational, but noticeable enough to raise questions. Was he still neutral? Or was he subtly choosing a side? And in hip-hop culture, perception is everything. Even small shifts become statements. Even silence becomes meaning. From Kendrick's perspective, if you're actively challenging dominance in the industry and someone previously neutral appears to lean toward that system, it changes the equation. Because now it's not just competition, it's alignment. And according to circulating claims, that perceived alignment led to a private confrontation between Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole. A closed-door interaction. No media, no audience, no recording meant for public eyes. The setting is unclear, possibly backstage, possibly at a private industry event. But what remains consistent across reports is the energy. Tense, focused, unavoidable. This wasn't casual discussion. It wasn't friendly disagreement. It was direct. And Kendrick, according to the narrative, approached it with intent. The issue wasn't just Drake as an individual. It was what Drake represents: mainstream dominance, industry influence, narrative control. And if Kendrick is challenging that system, then anyone perceived as supporting or reinforcing it becomes part of the conversation, including Cole. Again, none of this is officially confirmed, but the consistency of the claims, combined with recent lyrical shifts and public interpretations, is enough to keep the discussion alive. Because fans are watching everything now. Every lyric, every interview, every pause, every silence, and everything is being analyzed like evidence. That's what makes this moment so explosive, not just the claim itself, but the environment around it. The Big Three dynamic is no longer seen as stable. It feels like it's evolving in real time. And nobody knows exactly what direction it's going. What's clear is that fans are no longer just consuming music. They're interpreting it like a coded conversation. And every new release adds more fuel to the speculation. Because at this point, the question isn't just what was said between Kendrick and J. Cole. It's what everything else in hip-hop is really saying underneath it all. And until there's direct confirmation or denial, the conversation isn't slowing down. If anything, it's only getting deeper, louder, and more divided with every passing day. None of this was ever supposed to become public, but somehow it did. And what started as quiet speculation about Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole has now turned into one of the most heavily discussed alleged behind-the-scenes moments in modern hip-hop. Because this isn't just about two artists having a disagreement. It's about perception, alignment, and the shifting balance between three of the biggest names in the culture: Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, and Drake. And right now, none of them have said a word publicly about it. No confirmations, no denials, just silence. But in situations like this, silence doesn't settle things, it amplifies them. Because the longer there's no official explanation, the more the narrative gets shaped by outside voices. Insider claims, fan theories, lyric breakdowns, and social media interpretations all start filling the gap. And once that happens, the story begins to grow on its own. People aren't just asking what happened anymore. They're asking what it means. Does it signal a real divide between the Big Three? A shift in alliances? Or is this all being exaggerated by timing, context, and interpretation? Nobody can say for sure. But what we do know, based on circulating claims, is that the situation didn't stay private for long. Because just when most people thought this was nothing more than speculation, details allegedly started leaking out about what actually happened in that room. And according to multiple unverified sources, this wasn't a casual conversation. It was a confrontation, a direct one. The setting is still unclear. Some say it happened backstage at a private industry event. Others suggest it was inside a studio, away from cameras and completely controlled. But every version of the story agrees on one thing: the energy changed the moment Kendrick Lamar walked in. This wasn't small talk. This wasn't friendly interaction. This was intentional. One insider described it in a way that stuck with people. You could feel it before anything was said. That alone paints the picture. Two of the most influential artists in modern hip-hop, standing in the same space, fully aware of everything being said outside that room, and everything that hasn't been said yet. And then, according to these claims, Kendrick didn't waste time easing into anything. He went straight to the point. Why are you speaking on it like that? No build-up, no soft entry, just a direct question that immediately set the tone. Because that's what makes this moment stand out in the way people are describing it. It wasn't curiosity. It was confrontation. And J. Cole reportedly didn't back away from it. Sources claim his response was calm, controlled, and firm. I said what I said. Short, direct, final. No apology, no long explanation, no attempt to soften it. And that's where things reportedly escalated, not through shouting or chaos, but through positioning. Because now the conversation wasn't vague anymore. It had direction. Kendrick allegedly pushed further. Not aggressively in tone, but sharper in intent. You picking sides now? That question becomes the center of everything, because it shifts the entire meaning of the interaction. It's no longer about opinions. It's about alignment. And according to these circulating claims, J. Cole's response is what changed the dynamic again. I'm standing on what's real. On the surface, it sounds neutral. But in context, it's ambiguous enough to be interpreted in multiple ways. And Kendrick reportedly didn't interpret it as neutrality. He saw it as positioning. From there, the conversation allegedly deepened. Insiders suggest Kendrick made it clear that his issue wasn't just about Drake as an individual artist. It was about influence, about control, about how narratives form in the industry and who gets to shape them. And then came the line that people keep circling back to. This ain't about him, it's about what y'all letting happen. That statement changes the entire framework of the conversation, because it expands the conflict beyond individuals. It turns it into a system-level critique. Not just who is doing what, but what the environment is allowing to happen. And in that version of events, everyone becomes part of the discussion, including J. Cole. But according to the same reports, Cole didn't escalate. He didn't argue. He didn't match intensity. Instead, he reportedly stayed calm and responded with something unexpected. I'm not here to play roles in your narrative. That line shifts everything again. Because now it's not about taking sides. It's about refusing the framing entirely. Cole, in this version of events, is not agreeing or disagreeing. He is stepping outside of the structure of the conversation itself. And that creates a different kind of tension. Not loud tension, not explosive tension, but stillness, the kind that fills a room without sound. According to insiders, after that exchange, the room went quiet. Not awkwardly, not dramatically, just heavy, because both artists had made their positions clear without raising their voices. No insults, no breakdown, just perspective versus perspective, pressure versus resistance. And then, according to one of the more surprising claims, something unexpected happened. The confrontation didn't end in conflict. It ended in acknowledgement. A pause, eye contact, a moment of silence that shifted the energy again. And then, reportedly, Kendrick nodded. Not in agreement, not in surrender, but in recognition. And J. Cole nodded back. If that version of events is accurate, then what happened wasn't a breakdown in relationship. It was a moment of mutual understanding between two artists who may not agree, but recognize each other's position. Because in hip-hop, confrontation doesn't always lead to separation. Sometimes it leads to clarity. But even that detail remains unverified. And other versions of the story suggest something different entirely, that there was no resolution at all, that the conversation ended exactly where it started, with tension, perspective differences, and no final agreement. which means the real story might not be about what was said in that room. It might be about what comes after, because now the conversation has already escaped private space. It's in public interpretation. It's in fan debate. It's in lyric analysis. And most importantly, it's in silence from all three artists involved. Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, Drake. None of them have confirmed anything. None of them have denied anything. And that silence is exactly why this situation keeps growing. Because the longer it continues, the more people start connecting dots that may or may not be connected at all. Past interviews get rewatched. Old collaborations get reinterpreted. Lyrics get decoded differently than before. And moments that once looked like mutual respect now get re-examined through the lens of competition. Which raises one unavoidable question. Was there always tension beneath the surface that fans simply didn't notice? Or is this entire narrative being constructed in real time by speculation? At this point, nobody knows for sure. But what is clear is that this situation has already changed the way people interpret everything these artists do. And until someone directly addresses it, the conversation isn't slowing down. If anything, it's only becoming more layered, more divided, and more intense with every passing interpretation. They show up in music, in interviews, in subtle lines that fans spend weeks decoding. Or does this situation escalate into something more public, more direct, more impossible to ignore? Because if there's one thing people know about artists at this level, it's that they don't just let moments like this disappear. They respond in ways that often take time to fully understand. And just when it felt like people had a grip on what was happening between Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole, another piece of information started circulating. Something that doesn't just add detail, but completely shifts how the entire situation is being interpreted. And this is where things get even more complicated. Because the next wave of claims didn't come from inside a studio or from an industry insider. It came from the music itself. Fans began noticing something unusual. At first, it was small, a short, low-quality snippet circulating across forums and fan pages. No official release, no confirmation, just a fragment of audio that spread quickly because of who people believed they were hearing. And in that snippet, there was a line that instantly caught attention, a voice that sounded like Kendrick Lamar reportedly saying, "Don't stand next to me if you standing for him." That one line changed the tone completely. Because it didn't feel abstract. It didn't feel like general rap competition. It felt pointed, direct, personal. And immediately, people started linking it back to the alleged confrontation. If that line was real, then this wasn't just a private disagreement anymore. It was spilling into the music itself. And in hip-hop, once something becomes part of the music, it stops being private. It becomes permanent. Then just hours later, another clip surfaced. This time it was J. Cole. The tone was completely different, calm, controlled, but still firm, according to the circulating audio. He says something along the lines of, "I ain't choosing sides. I'm choosing peace, but don't mistake that for weakness." And suddenly, the situation becomes even more layered. On one side, Kendrick appears sharp, direct, drawing a clear emotional and ideological line. On the other, J. Cole refuses to engage in the same way, but still makes it clear he won't be pressured into a narrative he doesn't agree with. And in the middle of all this, Drake remains silent. No posts, no statements, no reaction. But that silence is becoming its own kind of message, because the more he says nothing, the more people start projecting meaning onto it. Some believe he's watching everything unfold strategically. Others think he's preparing something bigger behind the scenes. And then came the twist that pushed the conversation even further. A producer, someone not widely known, not a public-facing figure, posted a now-deleted message claiming they had been present during parts of the interaction between Kendrick and J. Cole. And in that message, they wrote something that immediately shifted the narrative again. "Y'all think this about Drake. It's way deeper than that." That line spread fast. Because if it's not just about Drake, then what is it about? And this is where interpretations started multiplying. Some believe the situation is about control, who influences the direction of hip-hop, who shapes the culture, and who defines what dominance looks like in the modern era. In that framing, Kendrick represents precision and lyrical intent. Drake represents mass reach and mainstream dominance. And J. Cole sits in the middle, respected, balanced, but not fully aligned with either extreme. So if tension exists, it may not be personal at all. It may be structural. And that makes it even harder to define. Fans started digging into the past, old interviews, old lyrics, old moments where all three artists crossed paths. Things that once looked like mutual respect now get reinterpreted as coded tension. Lines that once felt harmless now feel layered. Moments that were once dismissed as coincidence are now being analyzed as signals. And slowly, the story starts to look less like a sudden conflict and more like a long buildup that people are only now noticing. Meanwhile, none of the artists involved have confirmed anything. No statements, no clarifications, just silence and continued output through music. But in hip-hop culture, silence doesn't calm speculation. It intensifies it. Because when there are no answers, people create their own. And now the entire conversation has split. One side believes Kendrick is challenging a system, calling out influence and imbalance. They see his stance as accountability, not aggression. To them, it's about exposing how power works in the industry. Another side sees J. Cole as the voice of restraint, someone refusing to turn everything into conflict. They view his position as maturity, not avoidance, a refusal to be pulled into narratives that don't represent him. And in the background of all of this is Drake, whose silence continues to grow louder by the day. Some interpret it as strategy, others see it as detachment, but either way, it keeps him at the center of the conversation without saying a word. As influencers, analysts, and fans continue breaking down every lyric and every past interview, the situation keeps expanding beyond control. What started as an alleged private moment between two artists has now turned into a cultural debate about power, perception, and positioning in hip-hop. And the biggest question now isn't what was said. It's what happens next. Because if these tensions truly exist beneath the surface, then they won't stay hidden forever. They will eventually show up in music, in interviews, or in moments that can't be ignored. And until that happens, the silence, the speculation, and the interpretations will only keep growing louder. YouTube commentators, podcasters, and analysts are all breaking it down from every possible angle, every line, every snippet, every rumored interaction, every pause that might mean something more. One viral breakdown summed it up perfectly. This isn't about who's better anymore. It's about who defines the culture. And that single idea completely shifted the direction of the conversation. Because now people aren't just debating music or lyrics. They're debating influence, legacy, and control over the narrative of hip-hop itself. Does Drake finally break his silence and shift the entire dynamic? Or is there something even bigger still hidden beneath all of this that hasn't surfaced yet? Because if even part of these claims is accurate, then this situation isn't resolving. It's building, layer by layer, moment by moment. And each new piece of information adds pressure to a system already stretched thin. At this point, the conversation is no longer just about three artists. It's about perception, power, narrative control, and how hip-hop defines itself in real time. So the question becomes unavoidable. Is Kendrick Lamar challenging something larger than just individuals. Is J. Cole's neutrality actually a position in itself? And is Drake's silence strategic, or simply the calm before something much bigger? Nobody knows for sure. But everyone is watching. Because in situations like this, the next move doesn't just add to the story. It defines it. And when it comes, it won't be quiet. It never is. As more alleged snippets and insider-style claims circulated, the narrative kept shifting. One moment it was about a simple disagreement between two artists with different perspectives. The next moment it was being described as a deeper ideological split about direction, influence, and control in hip-hop. Fans began dissecting everything, not just recent music but years of interviews, old verses, award show moments, even casual interactions that once meant nothing but now suddenly felt loaded with hidden meaning. The internet does that when it gets obsessed with a story. It turns history into evidence. And still, none of the three names at the center of it all said a word publicly. That silence didn't slow anything down. In fact, it accelerated the entire situation. Because when there is no official version of events, people build their own. And once those versions start competing, the story stops belonging to the artists and starts belonging to the audience. The most talked about angle remained the alleged confrontation between Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole. According to circulating claims, it wasn't loud or chaotic. It wasn't some dramatic fight or public fallout. Instead, it was described as a controlled, intense exchange in a private setting where words carried more weight than volume. Some sources claimed it happened backstage at an industry event. Others insisted it was in a studio environment after a recording session. The exact location didn't seem to matter as much as the energy people described. Focused, heavy, unavoidable. What made the situation explode even further was the idea that Kendrick didn't approach the conversation casually. The rumors suggested he came in with a purpose, directly addressing Cole's perceived positioning in the ongoing narrative around Drake. Cole, who has long been viewed as someone who avoids unnecessary conflict, was suddenly being interpreted by fans as someone shifting slightly, even subtly, in perceived alignment. And in hip-hop culture, even a slight perception shift can turn into a full narrative. According to the circulating version of events, Kendrick questioned that shift directly. Not aggressively in a chaotic sense, but in a way that forced clarity. The alleged tone wasn't confusion, it was challenge. Cole's supposed response, depending on which version of the rumor people believed, ranged from calm neutrality to firm refusal to be placed into anyone else's storyline. One of the most repeated interpretations of his stance was that he wasn't choosing sides, he was choosing authenticity. But even that phrase became fuel for debate, because people couldn't agree on what it actually meant. The most intense part of the alleged exchange wasn't even about Drake by name, at least not directly. It was about what he represents in the current structure of the industry: success, dominance, global reach, and cultural control. Kendrick, in the rumored framing, wasn't just questioning individuals, but the system of influence itself. And Cole, standing somewhere in between, became the focal point of interpretation. To some, he looked like a mediator. To others, a participant who refused to admit alignment. And to others still, someone carefully protecting his position. As these interpretations multiplied online, the story stopped being about what happened in a room and became about what people believed it meant. That's when things escalated even further. Old lyrics were revisited with new suspicion. Interviews where the artists once praised each other were now analyzed for tone and body language. Even moments of mutual respect were reinterpreted as strategic restraint rather than genuine admiration. Meanwhile, the silence from Kendrick, Cole, and Drake only made the speculation louder. No clarifications came, no denials were issued, no explanations were offered, and in the absence of facts, the internet filled every gap with theories. One of the most viral shifts in the narrative came when a supposed snippet began circulating online. It allegedly featured a voice attributed to Kendrick Lamar delivering a line that fans immediately linked to the rumored tension. The line was interpreted as a boundary being drawn, a declaration of separation between personal alignment and artistic positioning. Whether the audio was real, edited, or completely unrelated didn't matter as much as the reaction it generated. People treated it like confirmation. Almost immediately after, another clip began circulating, this time attributed to J. Cole. In this verse, the tone was calmer, more reflective. The message, as interpreted by listeners, leaned toward peace, but with an undercurrent of resistance against being dragged into external conflict. That contrast between the two alleged perspectives fueled even more division among fans, because it painted the situation not as one-sided tension, but as a philosophical split. While this was happening, Drake's silence became its own storyline. Some interpreted it as strategy, a calculated decision to let others exhaust themselves while he remained detached. Others saw it as observation, as if he were waiting for the right moment to respond in a way that would reset the entire conversation. And a smaller group believed the silence meant something deeper was already in motion behind the scenes. Then came another wave of claims suggesting the situation wasn't limited to just one confrontation. According to these unverified reports, there may have been additional conversations happening indirectly between camps, messages being exchanged, or discussions occurring through intermediaries. Nothing was confirmed, but the idea alone was enough to shift public perception again. Because now the narrative wasn't just about a single moment, it was about an unfolding sequence. Industry voices began reacting cautiously. Some artists and commentators warned against turning private interactions into public entertainment, emphasizing that not everything needed to be decoded or turned into content. Others pushed back, suggesting that hip-hop has always been built on competition, interpretation, and public discourse. That disagreement itself became part of the larger conversation, adding another layer of division. As the speculation grew, so did the intensity of analysis. Influencers, podcasters, and commentators started breaking down every possible angle. Some focused on lyrical evidence, others on historical relationships, and others purely on behavioral interpretation. One viral breakdown suggested that the entire situation wasn't really about individual conflict at all, but about cultural positioning. Who defines the direction of modern hip-hop, who shapes its boundaries, and who influences its future narrative? That idea resonated widely because it elevated the discussion beyond personal drama. It reframed everything as a struggle over influence itself, rather than rivalry between artists. And once that framing took hold, every new rumor felt more significant. The tension increased further when another alleged insider claim suggested that what fans were witnessing might only be fragments of a much larger situation. According to this idea, the public had only seen small pieces of a much more complex sequence of interactions, conversations, and creative responses that hadn't yet been released. Some even claimed that unreleased music or recorded material existed that would eventually contextualize everything. This is where the narrative reached its most unstable point, because once people believe there is hidden context, every detail becomes suspicious, every silence becomes meaningful, every delay becomes intentional. And still, no one at the center of the story stepped forward to clarify anything. As time passed, the situation evolved into something almost self-sustaining. The artists were no longer controlling the narrative. The audience was. Every post, every clip, every theory added fuel to a fire that no one seemed interested in extinguishing. Even contradictory claims coexisted without resolution, because certainty was no longer the goal. Engagement was. At the same time, a new layer of interpretation emerged around J. Cole's role. Some fans began to view his neutrality not as avoidance, but as a deliberate position in itself. Not choosing sides became, in their eyes, a statement about refusing to participate in manufactured division. Others disagreed, arguing that neutrality in moments of tension is still a form of alignment. That disagreement further split the audience into competing interpretations. Kendrick's perceived role also became more complex in the public imagination. Some framed him as challenging industry structure and questioning dominance. Others saw his rumored stance as unnecessary escalation that turned ambiguity into conflict. Both interpretations existed simultaneously, and neither could fully override the other. Drake, meanwhile, remained the most unpredictable element simply because of his silence. In an environment where everyone else was being interpreted, his absence of interpretation became powerful. People weren't just waiting for him to respond. They were waiting to see if he would respond at all. As the conversation expanded, even neutral observers began asking a different question. What actually happens if this escalates further? If music references continue to appear, if indirect responses continue to surface, and if public interpretation continues to intensify, does it remain contained within art, or do it spill into something more permanent in the culture? That question lingered because history shows that hip-hop has always transformed tension into music. Diss tracks, responses, subliminals, all of it is part of the tradition. But what makes this situation feel different to many observers is the scale of attention and the speed at which interpretation spreads. Eventually, the entire discussion reached a point where certainty no longer mattered. What mattered was momentum. Every new rumor added pressure. Every silence added speculation. Every interpretation added weight. And so the story continues to move forward without resolution, suspended between truth and perception, reality and narrative. No one knows exactly what was said behind closed doors. No one knows what is being recorded, and no one knows what will eventually be released into the public space. But one thing is clear. The conversation isn't slowing down. If anything, it's building towards something larger, something that could either clarify everything or complicate it even further. And until someone directly involved decides to break the silence, the internet will keep doing what it does best, filling the gaps, rewriting the meaning, and turning uncertainty into story. Because at this point, the real tension isn't just between the artists. It's between what actually happened and what the world believes happened.